What turns someone into a serial killer? How does a person become so detached from humanity that he not only kills people, but forces his own young son to watch and even film the murders? For months, a case from a quiet community near Moscow called SNT Zvezda dominated headlines across Russia. As investigators dug deeper, they found themselves looking at a man who seemed completely ordinary. He had a wife, a child, and a life that looked normal from the outside. The neighbors knew him. Nothing about him stood out. No one could have imagined what was happening behind closed doors. Because as the investigation unfolded, a much darker story began to emerge. For years, this man had been hiring young women as babysitters and bringing them into his home. Then, one by one, some of those women would disappear. And in certain cases, they were never seen again. On July 27, 2025, a 19-year-old woman named Alina Bolatova vanished. At the time, very little was known. The only confirmed information was that she had last been seen in the town of Elektrugly, in the Bogorodsky district. She was about 176 centimeters tall, with dark hair and brown eyes. Her family couldn't even say for sure what she had been wearing on the day she disappeared. What made the case even more unusual was how late the search efforts began. Alina disappeared on July 27th, but volunteer search teams didn't start actively looking for her until September 23rd, almost 2 months later. By then, valuable time had already been lost. Alina was studying law at the Russian University of Cooperation, focusing on social security and legal studies. Her classmates described her as quiet, hardworking, and full of energy. She consistently earned good grades, was always willing to help others, and took part in student activities. She also loved drawing, and according to the people who knew her, she was genuinely talented. Nobody believed she had simply decided to run away. Alina lived in Korolyov just outside Moscow. But the last confirmed trace of her placed her in a cottage settlement called SNT Zvezda on July 27th. Then, 3 months later, another young woman disappeared. On October 27th, 25-year-old Maria Vlasova vanished. And just like Alina, the last place she was seen was SNT Zvezda. Families and volunteer search groups began speaking with local residents and putting up missing person posters throughout the area. There wasn't much information about Alina, but investigators eventually learned that Maria had been living in Moscow and had been traveling regularly to SNT Zvezda for some time. Shortly before she disappeared, she had started working as a babysitter for one of the local residents. Even so, police initially saw no connection between the two cases. They were handled by different departments, and for a while, nobody linked the disappearances together. In fact, when Maria was first listed by the volunteer search organization Liza Alert, she was simply reported as a missing woman from her home district. For quite some time, it seems no one even realized that she had been in SNT Zvezda on the day she vanished. The early searches produced no real leads. Local residents had no answers, and the families were left hoping that both women were still alive. SNT Zvezda is fairly large for a cottage community, with around 1,000 houses. Back during the Soviet era, many of the plots there were given to military personnel and engineers. Only a small number of the original families still live there today. Most sold their homes years ago and moved away. According to local residents, only about 100 households remain there year-round. Everyone else usually comes back on weekends or during holidays. Ever since the women disappeared, the atmosphere in the community had changed. People described it as feeling like something out of a horror movie. Missing person posters with Maria's photo were taped to utility poles, fences, and even the entrance to the settlement. Everywhere you looked, there was a reminder that someone had vanished without a trace. Then everything changed. A young woman was admitted to a hospital and told doctors a story that would completely alter the investigation. She said she had escaped from a man who had been torturing her, sexually assaulting her, and planning to kill her. The people who heard her story were stunned. The medical staff were horrified, and the officers who were called in immediately realized something else. There was a very real chance that the earlier disappearances were connected. After the woman's testimony, police arrested a man named Dmitry Artamoshin. Born in 1978, Dmitry was from Korolyov just outside Moscow. He lived in his private cottage in SNT Zvezda, not far from the settlement's administrative building. To most of his neighbors, he seemed completely ordinary. Nobody had ever seriously suspected him. But it didn't take long for Russian media outlets to give him a nickname, the Bogorodsky Maniac. As news of the allegations spread, fear swept through the community. Many residents no longer felt safe returning to their cottages. Some families temporarily moved in with relatives, while others stayed in apartments in the city instead. Families with teenage daughters were especially terrified. Before long, the fear spread far beyond St. Zvezda. The entire Moscow region became captivated by the case. There wasn't much publicly known about Dmitry at first. People described him as relatively young, energetic, and one of the few residents who lived in the settlement year-round, both in summer and winter. He had a wife and a son. What made the story even more unsettling was that many neighbors remembered him as a kind and helpful person. They said he was always willing to lend a hand, whether that meant helping push a car out of the snow or volunteering for heavy work around the neighborhood. Investigators later learned that Dmitry worked as an auto mechanic, although much of his income appeared to come from buying and selling cars. His social media pages were filled with vehicle listings, and his yard was reportedly stacked with tires. Still, some neighbors admitted that something about him had always felt a little off. Nothing specific, just a feeling. As investigators dug into his past, they began to suspect that many of Dmitry's behaviors may have been rooted in his childhood. According to one former neighbor, Dmitry's mother left the family when he was still young. He was raised by his father and a woman who later became his father's partner. When Dmitry turned 18, he moved out. But his father and the woman continued living a life marked by heavy drinking and constant conflict. Eventually, the woman died as a result of severe alcohol addiction. After that, Dmitry's father lived alone for some time. But as his health deteriorated and he became unable to care for himself, Dmitry stepped in. He placed him in a nursing home, sold the house, and moved on. Over time, Dmitry seemed to follow a similar path. The difference was that alcohol wasn't his only problem. He eventually became involved with drugs as well. Later, he met a woman named Polina. People close to the couple said Dmitry wasn't openly violent at the beginning of the relationship. According to them, his behavior gradually became worse after the birth of their son. Their 9-year-old boy appeared frequently on Dmitry's social media accounts. In some videos, the child could even be seen sitting behind the wheel of a car while Dmitry filmed him. One of Dmitry's former friends later described him as an unusual person even when he was young. He said Dmitry often behaved strangely, had a short temper, and could be rude or aggressive toward other people without warning. At the same time, he was intelligent and extremely calculating. That same friend claimed that around 25 years earlier, Dmitry had dated a woman named Svetlana, and even back then he had shown signs of controlling and abusive behavior that would later appear again in accounts from other victims. On Dmitry's property stood several different buildings: the main house, a large shed, and an old abandoned structure. In reality, very few people knew him well. Other than a handful of nearby neighbors, most residents had little contact with him at all. Investigators later discovered that the so-called Bogorodsky Maniac already had a criminal record. Twice. The first conviction came in 2004. Dmitry and several accomplices had allegedly drugged a warehouse security guard with sleeping pills before stealing a large quantity of goods. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But after his release in 2009, it took only a few months for him to end up in trouble again. This time, he stole a car. He was quickly caught, convicted, and sentenced to another 4 years behind bars. Yet one of the strangest chapters in Dmitry's life involved his wife, Polina. In the spring of 2025, 36-year-old Polina suddenly disappeared. Dmitry posted repeatedly on social media, asking people to help find her. He claimed she had vanished after a trip to St. Petersburg and even offered a cash reward for information. Whenever people asked what had happened, his answers were vague. He would say that Polina had left without warning and suggest that maybe he was partly to blame because, in his own words, he had forgotten how to be a good husband. But eventually, Polina was found in a hospital in St. Petersburg. And that's when the real story started to come out. According to Polina, she hadn't disappeared at all. She had escaped. She claimed Dmitry constantly humiliated her, beat her, handcuffed her to a radiator, and forced her into sexual acts against her will. Finally, in the spring of 2025, she managed to get away. Polina later said she believed it was only after she left that Dmitry began actively searching for new victims. What's even more disturbing is that many of the neighbors already knew he mistreated his wife. But apparently, no one imagined the situation was anywhere near this dangerous. After escaping, Polina spent around 8 months in a rehabilitation center. She needed treatment not only for the psychological trauma she had endured, but also for drug addiction, an addiction she later claimed Dmitry had forced on her. The person who ultimately helped her get away was one of Dmitry's former business partners, a man named Roman. Years later, Roman said he simply couldn't watch what was happening anymore. According to him, he saw Polina suffering almost every day. He had worked with Dmitry for a while, but over time, Dmitry's behavior became increasingly violent. Roman said it felt like he was completely spiraling out of control. Polina repeatedly asked him for help. Some nights, she would call him in tears, begging him to come and get her and her son out of the house. When Roman finally helped her escape, Polina took her child and went to stay with family in St. Petersburg. But by then, both her physical and mental condition had deteriorated so badly that she had to be hospitalized. Alongside the emotional trauma, she was also forced to go through drug rehabilitation. For a while, her son remained with Polina's relatives. Then Dmitry found them. According to the family, he showed up and took the boy back with him almost by force. Afterwards, he reportedly told Polina's relatives that she had become addicted to drugs on her own and that he had nothing to do with it. Roman later revealed something else that caught investigators' attention. After Polina left, he said he saw Dmitry spending time with several very young women, some of whom appeared to be no older than 18 or 19. Even after Roman cut ties with him, Dmitry allegedly continued threatening him. Another acquaintance also claimed that a different woman occasionally visited Dmitry's house. She wasn't his partner. According to witnesses, she would sometimes administer 4 drips to him after he used drugs. At one point, Dmitry reportedly told that woman that he was keeping a 19-year-old girl inside the house and handcuffing her so she couldn't escape. At the time, nobody took the comment seriously. People assumed he was intoxicated, exaggerating, or simply talking nonsense. After his wife left, Dmitry began posting ads online looking for a live-in babysitter. The job sounded simple enough: care for his son and live in his cottage in St. Zvezda. But investigators would later discover that 4 different young women had been hired for the position over time, and 2 of them eventually disappeared. Almost every story followed the same pattern. At first, Dmitry presented himself as friendly, trustworthy, and completely normal. Then, little by little, he would begin a relationship with the young woman, introduce her to drugs, and gradually isolate her. And then, suddenly, she would vanish. Friends and family would stop hearing from her altogether. The first woman who managed to escape that house was a 19-year-old named Anna. She had answered Dmitry's babysitting ad without having any idea what she was walking into. Later, she recalled what happened. He was looking for a babysitter and a helper around the house. During the first week, everything seemed completely normal. But by the second week, he started becoming aggressive. That's when he began putting drugs into my drinks. Unlike some of the others, Anna managed to get away. But even after escaping, she ended up spending time in a clinic undergoing treatment for drug addiction, just like Polina. It appears that after Anna escaped, Dmitry made a decision. He wasn't going to leave any more witnesses behind. The next known victim was 19-year-old Alina. Like the others, she initially believed she was dealing with an ordinary man. It didn't take long for her to discover otherwise. Alina's mother later said that the last time she spoke to her daughter was on July 27th. At that point, Alina had already been working at Dmitry's house in St. Zvezda for some time, taking care of his 9-year-old son. Even now, however, her mother refuses to believe that Alina is dead. Dmitry himself has never admitted to murdering any of the missing women. Instead, he claimed that one babysitter left after an argument, while another was simply found dead inside the house one day. To this day, neither woman's body has ever been found. Officially, both are still listed as missing persons. Alina's mother said that by the time she learned her daughter was working for Dmitry, she had already been there for a while. From the beginning, she had a bad feeling about it. But Alina wouldn't change her mind. According to her mother, she would always say the same thing. "Mom, don't worry. It's just a job." Despite her concerns, mother and daughter stayed in touch every day. Alina regularly sent her short videos through messaging apps, and for a while, everything seemed normal. But one major question remained. If Alina had disappeared in July, why did the search for her begin nearly 2 months later? Part of the reason was that her mother initially believed she had chosen to disappear. She was convinced her daughter was hiding somewhere voluntarily. She even insisted that Dmitry and Alina had gotten along well and that there was no way he could have harmed her. In her mind, Alina had simply run away. She also revealed another strange detail. Earlier that same year, in the spring of 2025, Alina's father, who lived separately from the family, had disappeared as well. Relatives searched for him on their own before officially reporting him missing in early April. That case never led anywhere. Investigators later learned that Dmitry's babysitting offer was unusually attractive. The job included a private room inside the cottage, meals, accommodation, and a monthly salary of around 100,000 rubles. For many young women, it sounded like a perfect opportunity. No rent, no food expenses, and a decent paycheck on top of it. Maria Vlasova accepted the job for exactly that reason. But before long, her relationship with Dmitry became something more than a professional arrangement. Maria was 25 years old and shared a rented apartment with a friend. A few months earlier, she had gone through a breakup. To support herself, she worked as both a babysitter and an employee at a dog boarding hotel. Friends described her as kind, gentle, and trusting. So when she came across an advertisement offering a live-in babysitting position for a young boy, she thought she had finally found a good opportunity. According to Maria, the job itself wasn't difficult at all. The child she looked after was independent, well-behaved, and easy to care for. A few days later, Dmitry started buying Maria flowers. He spent more and more time with her, and even let her drive some of his cars. Maria also ran a Telegram channel where she occasionally shared parts of her daily life. She posted photos of Dmitry's vehicles and pictures of herself spending time with his son. At one point, she even told a friend that Dmitry had proposed to her. According to Maria, he had promised to transfer his house and cars into her name. Little by little, it seemed she was beginning to trust him, and she appeared to enjoy the attention he was giving her. Then came the day she disappeared. Just before vanishing, Maria published the final post on her Telegram channel, a quote she had reposted from another account. It read, "I'm tired of waiting, and I don't want anything anymore." In early November, Maria's sister officially reported her missing. As investigators spoke with local residents, another strange detail emerged. Almost nobody in SNT Zvezda remembered seeing any of the missing women around the settlement. The theory was that Dmitry handled everything himself. He picked them up, drove them around, and brought them to the property without giving neighbors much chance to notice. When police searched Dmitry's home, they found items in the basement that made the case even more disturbing. There were handcuffs, numerous sexual devices, and dozens of women's bras. But what caught investigators' attention wasn't just the quantity. It was the fact that the items clearly didn't belong to a single person. The sizes, styles, and brands were all different. It looked as though they may have belonged to multiple women. Investigators also uncovered another unusual aspect of Dmitry's personality: his obsession with horror movies. He belonged to several online horror communities, and among all the films he followed, one franchise stood out above the rest: Halloween. The series follows Michael Myers, a psychiatric patient who escapes confinement and goes on a killing spree targeting young people. Now, Dmitry himself is expected to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. If specialists determine that he was legally insane at the time of the alleged crimes, he could potentially be sent to a psychiatric institution instead of prison. For now, however, Dmitry remains in custody and has refused to provide any explanation to investigators. At the same time, detectives continue searching the property and surrounding areas, interviewing witnesses, and trying to determine exactly what happened to the missing women. They are also investigating whether Dmitry could be connected to the disappearances of other women as well. But perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire case involves Dmitry's 9-year-old son. The boy is currently being monitored by psychologists and investigators. According to information uncovered during the investigation, Dmitry allegedly forced his son to witness some of the things that happened to his victims. Doctors have diagnosed the child with post-traumatic stress disorder. Investigators reportedly documented injuries and scars on his body, and psychologists say he appears deeply traumatized and frightened. The boy also told investigators that his father regularly gave him a foul-tasting juice. After drinking it, he would sleep for hours. Even now, the search for Alina and Maria continues. While investigators were examining SNT Zvezda, divers were brought in to search the lake near the settlement. So far, however, no trace of either woman's body has been found. More recently, another report surfaced. Investigators began looking into whether Dmitry may have been involved in the disappearance of another woman, a nurse who occasionally visited his house to administer 4 treatments after nights when he had reportedly been using drugs. The investigative committee has urged anyone with information about the case, or anyone who believes they may have been victimized by Dmitry, to come forward and contact law enforcement. This is unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. Cases of this scale often take many months, and sometimes more than a year, before investigators can piece together exactly what happened. And ultimately, under the law, a person is presumed innocent until proven guilty in court.